Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Cannabis Alliance's Cannabis Hospitality Cannabis Deserves Legal Spaces 2025 briefing. Uh, Please welcome Caitlin Ryan, Executive Director, to share a land acknowledgement and a bit about the Cannabis Alliance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome this morning. Um, I uh, I'm having a morning. My name is Caitlin Ryan. I'm the executive director here at the Cannabis Alliance. I would like to welcome you to this really important conversation. Here at the Cannabis Alliance, we are dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry. As a part of that mission, have been for several years been working on cannabis hospitality, and I'm really excited for this conversation. As we get started with this conversation today, I would like to acknowledge that we are holding this meeting on unceded ancestral lands. We respect the sovereignty of the Native people to this land, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water since time immemorial. I recommend that you look up whose land you are on and who those caretakers have been. This is broadcasting across the state, so this is a great opportunity to learn a little bit more. As I said, I am really excited about the conversation that we're about to have with some really extraordinary experts this morning. I'd like to now bring up Jessica Pichardo. She is our president, newly minted president here at the Cannabis Alliance, as well as the committee chair for our Equity and Justice Committee. Jessica, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. And again, welcome to our conversation today about cannabis hospitality. We're excited to have this briefing. And I want to thank Charlotte Brathwaite, who started the conversation this morning, who welcomed you all for being the chair of this committee and really ushering and stewarding this conversation and collaboration today. I will go ahead and have her bring up our next speaker so that we can get some information from Dee, our committee chair, who is the committee chair of our data committee.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you, Lotta and the Cannabis Alliance for inviting the data committee to the stage. I'm Demarlin Sisney, but you can call me Dee, the data guy, president of the Data Guys, a data and ML engineering. Pleasure of serving as the chair for the data committee. And today we are here to really tell the data story behind why Washington is more than ready for legal cannabis hospitality and why the numbers show it's time to really align policy with the reality already travel, get and experience community. The data committee is where information becomes insight and insight becomes impact. Using data as a tool for justice, transparency, and community empowerment across Washington's cannabis ecosystem. Guided by our octopus model, each committee liaison serves as a tentacle, connecting other workforce, medical access, ensuring that data flows both ways to inform real decisions. And our mission is to leverage data as a force for equity and transformation, really centering BIPOC operators, patients, and small businesses while building systems that tell the full story of cannabis and beyond. The dashboard that we use, Hospitality and Market Insights, pulls together official data from the Office of Financial Management, Liquor and Cannabis Board, and the U.S. Census. And it shows looks and behaves like a hospitality economy, and Lotta will dive into that a little bit more. And what's missing is really that alignment between our values of inclusion and the laws that define where cannabis belongs. And so our job as the data committee is to really ensure that when we say legal cannabis deserves legal spaces, we can prove it. And it's not just with passion, but with numbers, maps, measurements, measurable, equitable outcomes as well. So thank you so much for being part of the conversation and for seeing data, but as a backbone for progress. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Lotta.
Thanks, DeMarlin. Let's get his wonderful dashboard presented to everyone here today. And as everyone kindly introduced, I am Charlotte Brathwaite. Friends call me Lotta. I am the chair of the Hospitality Committee and a board member here at the Cannabis Alliance. So, as you can see on screen is the hospitality dashboard created by our data committee in collaboration with this project that we had today. And as DeMarlin mentioned, Washington is already a hospitality state. It is a state that welcomes millions of visitors, that thrives on good food, good drink, good company, and increasingly good cannabis. Yet as our data shows, we have yet to extend the same legitimacy to cannabis as we've long afforded to alcohol. In 2024, Washington welcomed over 110 million visitors who spent more than 25 billion across lodging, food, recreation, and retail. Our state knows how to host. We know how to build experiences that connect people, drive economies, and celebrate culture. When it comes to cannabis, a plant that's a part of our culture, part of our economy, and a part of our identity, the doors of hospitality remain closed. Our cannabis retailers generated 1.19 billion in sales last year and contributed 454.9 million in excise tax to the state. That money that supports schools, healthcare, communities. Yet not a single dollar from our visitors, not one, can legally flow into a cannabis-friendly venue. So that's the paradox, our soon to be available to our audience here. Our cannabis hospitality dashboard exposes. As you can see in front of you, some of the numbers that I have quoted. A little bit further than that, our population of Seattle alone showcases that there's quite a community here, quite a renter community here, quite a large amount of potential shoppers that we could be profiting from. So let's go down a little bit more to kind of explore this tourism. And now imagine what happens when those worlds finally connect. Visitors who can enjoy a craft cocktail at a rooftop bar in Seattle can also legally enjoy a cannabis beverage or a joint in a licensed, safe, and socially responsible setting because one of them doesn't consume alcohol, right? We know those partners that travel. When the plant is treated as a part of Washington's hospitality ecosystem, not apart from it, that's what you can see with us. So, like I said, we do have quite a 35.20% of our population are renters, not as much as our homeowners, gratefully, thanks to programs. However, that 35% legally does not have a safe place to consume. So let's talk about who lives and travels here. Washington's population stands at 8.04 million with 2.89 million renters, many in urban hubs like Seattle, Tacoma, or Spokane. In Seattle alone, more than half the residents, 55.8%, are renters. These are people who live in smaller spaces where shared, regulated environments aren't a luxury, they're a necessity. Among them are 1.69 million potential cannabis shoppers across the state, residents and visitors alike, who have nowhere legally to gather, connect, or consume together. And as someone who spent years curating cannabis events, I can tell you these spaces matter. I've seen firsthand how these events welcome cannabis consumption responsibly and intentionally, become spaces of connection, creativity, and community. Like the plant itself, these spaces are points of intersection where artists, veterans, patients, parents, and professionals meet. They are living proof that cannabis hospitality isn't a risk to manage, it's an opportunity to embrace. So, comparing frameworks, let's get down to it because this dashboard is quite amazing. Again, to back the digits, we have metrics going from 2018 to 2024 showing you our retail sales trends. And we did have that COVID spike as most states experienced with legal sales at that time. And we're heading in a downward trend. like we mentioned, those major counties, Seattle, Tacoma, Spokane. So now we're comparing the frameworks. Let's put this into perspective. Washington licensees over Washington licenses over 9,000 alcohol venues, bars, breweries, and lounges. Yet we have 0 cannabis consumption spaces. At the same time, the LCB own data tells us that the cannabis enforcement visits and violation rates are comparable to, and in many years lower than, alcohols. That means our regulatory infrastructure is already capable of ensuring safety and compliance. This isn't a question if we can regulate cannabis hospitality. It's a question of when will we align our rules with how Washingtonians and our visitors already live, work, and spend. Okay, so again, another metric there. Finally, the hospitality industry is one of Washington's largest employers, a living engine of culture and community. Cannabis doesn't compete with that system, it complements it. Legal hospitality venues could capture visitor spending currently lost to unregulated or private consumption, create new jobs in hospitality, compliance, and even event management, provide inclusive, culturally grounded spaces for entrepreneurs, patients, and creatives, and expand tourism tax revenue without raising rates. The data paints a clear picture. Washington is ready for legal cannabis hospitality. The demand exists, the infrastructure exists, the economic upside is undeniable. What's missing is alignment between our values of inclusion, our economic potential, and the laws that still treat cannabis as something separate. So, as we dive into the conversation today, I invite you to look beyond the numbers, see the people, the potential, and the policy window that's open before us. We have a chance to lead, to show that cannabis, when treated with the same respect and regulation as alcohol, can enhance tourism, strengthen communities, and celebrate culture. And to help us explore how we get there, we are joined by a panel of leaders who bring a range of perspectives, from regulatory insight to hospitality innovation and lived experience. Because legal cannabis deserves legal spaces, and Washington deserves to lead the way. So, joining us here today, our next guest, I'm going to bring to the stage, and excuse me as I stop sharing my screen. There we go. Oh, we have a couple comments. I'm from California, but I'd love to travel and visit Washington. My sister and her family live up near Seattle. I love the dashboard setup. Thank you so much for tuning in over there on YouTube. And now our first guest truly needs no introduction. Anyone who witnessed the evolution of cannabis culture in Washington. Vivian McPeak is the founder and executive director of Seattle's Hemp Fest, the world's largest annual cannabis reform rally. For over 3 decades, Vivian has been a part of Washington's cannabis advocacy, helping to transform public perception and policy through peaceful protests, community engagement, and education. His legacy embodies what happens when activism meets community and when cannabis becomes a catalyst for civic connection. Please welcome Vivian McPeak. Hi, Vivian. How you doing?
Hi, how you doing, Charlotte? Thank you.
Oh, no problem.
First of all, thank you for including me. I hope I have something productive to add to the conversation. I'm always so impressed with the work that the Alliance has been doing, and I'm sure will continue to do. As some folks might know, I'm an original Dankster. As mentioned, I helped create the Seattle Hemp Fest in 1991. And I served as the executive director of Hemp Fest from 1995 to 2019. And during much of that time, Hemp Fest was considered widely as the largest annual cannabis event in the world. Whether it actually was or not, it annually attracted in excess of 100,000 attendees for at least a decade and a half of the event's 28-year history. due to a combination of, and I'm just like assuming this, a combination of the way that the event was grandfathered in a very politically progressive city, and our capacity for running the event safely and relatively seamlessly, and some kind of mysterious organizational Jedi mind trick. The event featured tens upon tens of thousands of people pretty much imbibing cannabis with impunity, while the police largely looked on smiling. We like to joke that we had incinerated more cannabis than the DEA at Seattle Hemp Fest over the 28 years. However, after I-502 passed in Washington State in 2012, the city approached us, telling us that they wanted us to create 21 and over adult use consumption zones within the event. While creating these zones kind of threatened our model that had existed the entire time since our inception, we agreed to create a pilot project within the event, feeling that it could potentially contribute to the eventuality of legal adult consumption / hospitality statewide, advancing the progression of complete legalization on par with alcohol, which was an ultimate goal, of course, all along, was to get to a point where cannabis was just a commodity, a legal commodity for adults, like any other commodity. Our theory was that if it worked at HempFest, why couldn't it work in other events across the state, and also perhaps in businesses? Now, the city had some strict guidelines and requirements for these hospitality areas. Excuse me. The areas had to be secure, out of public view, staffed by licensed, bonded, insured security. A little frog in my throat. Excuse me. And that security needed to be trained in proper ID checking techniques, similar to our state's responsible beverage service RBS certification for bartenders and bouncers. The event staff had to have clickers to keep a head count to make sure that the attendance numbers were in a specific limited number at any time, any given time. And we suggested that small rectangular areas confined with cyclone fencing obscured by black visqueen walls would be a good model. The city demanded that we used a more durable fire retardant treated material for lining the fence panels. And incidentally, the cloth that the city required us to have cost us $10,000 for 2 areas, roughly maybe 30 by 25 feet. The majority of those costs were absorbed by a sponsor, which was the Washington Bud Company. And this gives me an opportunity just to kind of call out that the Washington Bud Company and the Cannabis Basics were really the 2 Washington cannabis businesses, the early Washington cannabis businesses that always had HempFest back, supporting and contributing to the event more than anybody else. And so I'm going to seize the opportunity to give them some love and some kudos. Our pilot hospitality tent had to have 3 staff pro security personnel working each consumption area and checking IDs. Attendees had to provide their own cannabis. It was all kind of bizarre because outside of these areas was tens of thousands of people still consuming weed, albeit more discreetly than in the following decade of HempFest. We were asked attendees to either go into the hospitality tent or stop imbibing. Our staff was not real enthusiastic about that, but we half-heartedly did it with minimal success. There were couches and bongs and dab rigs provided, and these zones were, like I said, reasonably attended for no other reason than really the novelty, the privacy of the fact that there was seating and wind protection, of course, provided because our event was on the waterfront in a big park. We did this program for 2014 and 2015. When Donald Trump won his first election, miraculously, the state stepped in all of a sudden and demanded that we stop providing these operation zones, which is ironic considering that the result was more flagrant and open supervised consumption in the park for decades. But we had other models for consumption as well, while they're all private, not public events. We had a giant VIP party inside of the event on Friday night, in a 400 by 100-foot circus tent, where people just blazed indiscriminately. We had members parties that we did off-site in homes and sometimes in businesses. And so we had a lot of different experiences with operating hospitality zones and offering people the ability. I think the most important thing to note from our experiences with all of these kind of models that we dabbled in was that during the entire history of these consumption zones, we never had any serious problems of any kind. If we're going to look for an experimental demonstrative project as a pilot to gauge and judge the safety and effectiveness of cannabis hospitality areas, it seems that having 100,000 people gather year after year for decades openly consuming cannabis with nary a serious accident, injury, or arrest, I would think that model has been tested. We also just have to look, of course, at the Emerald Cup in California, a sanctioned permitted event with one part of the event all ages and the other part 21 and over, with both legal consumption and sales. Really, there's no legitimate logical argument against having supervised legal consumption / hospitality areas. In our state, there are, of course, issues I'm sure that the Alliance is grappling with, like the Washington Clean Indoor Air and Smoke-Free laws, which means indoor smoking prohibition of any kind, concerns over secondhand exposure and youth access and pregnancy and mental health and local zoning and municipal opposition, things like that. But it's time that we're able to level the playing field and get cannabis in the same position that cigar bars and alcohol consumption areas enjoy. There's really no reason not to. And so I'm excited to see that there's traction and there's potential legislation and there's people working on this.
Thank you so much for sharing the history of Washington with us, Vivian. Once again, we really appreciate you being here. And we're going to bring up our next guest. So y'all make sure, if you're out there in the virtual world, give Vivian a round of applause for the 3 decades of, fighting for what we still are fighting for today. All right. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
So next, we're joined by Dr. Amanda Ryman, a leading researcher and educator on cannabis, public health, and harm reduction. Dr. Ryman's work, from her time at Drug Policy Alliance to her role as founder of Personal Plants, bridges science and culture. She's helped shape data-driven policies that prioritize safety and education and access. Her insights remind us that cannabis hospitality isn't without consumption. It's about care, or isn't just about consumption. It's about care, connection, and creating space where people can learn to engage with the plant responsibly. Please welcome Dr. Amanda Ryman to the stage. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I am. I'll leave you to it.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Dr. Amanda Ryman. I am, among other things, the founder of Personal Plants, which is a website that is educational in nature. And the goal is to help people develop healthy and balanced consumption habits and relationships with cannabis. So I am coming to you from land that is traditionally from the Steilacoom and Puyallup folks, now known as University Place, Washington. And I actually spoke at HempFest. Hi, Vivian. It's great to see you. 10 years ago. And that was the one and only time I'd ever been to Washington when I decided to move here. So obviously it was a great experience because I decided to make my home here. Okay, so I think you might think of my presentation a bit as the fun police. You're going to hear some really amazing opportunities in cannabis tourism from our speakers. And I'm here because from a public health perspective, I've been working on cannabis legalization since 1998. And one of the things that I've learned is that there's always people out there waiting for you to fail. And there are people out there waiting to point to those unfortunate circumstances that happen so they can use it as an excuse to shut the whole thing down. And so as we move into cannabis tourism and all the opportunities in Washington, we want to protect against that, right? We want people to have great experiences. We want them to come back. We want them to go home and talk about what an amazing time they had in Washington and how much cannabis tourism really supported their use of cannabis in a safe and healthy way. And so to do that, I've got a few tips for folks. So I'm not sure how I advance these because I don't have control. There you go. Okay. There we go. Okay. I'll just tell you when, like the olden days. So as I mentioned, cannabis and travel, they bring people together, and you're going to hear from Brian and Adelia and others about how this works and what's happening right now in cannabis tourism. But it's not just about the travel and the cannabis, it's the connection, right? So adventure and new experiences help form bonds and create deep memories. So when you travel with somebody, that picture that you took, that restaurant you went to, that weird guy at the hotel, all of these are experiences that bond you together. And this is true for both positive and negative experiences. So if you think back to some of your travel experiences, yes, you remember the positive things, the amazing view that you saw, the wonderful meal that you had, the new culture you got to experience. And you also remember the really negative experiences, when your flight was canceled and you had to spend the night in the airport, or when you got food poisoning from that restaurant. So what we want to do is we want to maximize the positive and minimize the negative. Because again, you're going to have folks that are coming to Washington from all over the world, like they do now, and experiencing cannabis tourism. And you want them to go back to their home and say to their friends and neighbors and coworkers, I had the most amazing time. I'd never used cannabis before, or I'd never had a cannabis beverage before, or I had never had the opportunity to use cannabis out at an event before. And it was amazing. And I had a great time. You want that kind of report to go back, not the report of, oh my gosh, I went there and I was excited to use cannabis, but I got way too high and I had an anxiety attack and they had to carry me out of the venue. That is not the report you want going back to places where cannabis may not even be legal yet. So, you have to remember, we are ambassadors for legalization. We are here to show people who live in Idaho and Kansas and Indiana what legalization can look like, so that they go back and tell their friends and relatives, people that may be voting for initiatives or speaking at city council meetings, why integrating legal cannabis into tourism is a good idea. So next slide. So the first thing to remember is we have to meet people where they are at. So cannabis tourism can attract newer consumers, people that have never used cannabis before, or maybe they're folks that have only used flower and been able to smoke flower because where they live, they still have an unregulated market. Sometimes people never use cannabis and then they're somewhere where it's legal and they're like, when in Rome, I'm here, it's legal, I'm going to try it for the very first time. And they're stepping out of their comfort zone. And so we have to remember that not everybody that comes in as a tourist is familiar with cannabis, knows about cannabis, just because they can walk into a dispensary or just because they can go to an event where cannabis consumption is happening means that they are equipped to consume cannabis safely and in a healthy way. So the tip here is to lead with education and not make assumptions about the level of experience or anybody's comfort with cannabis. So again, for some, this may be their first encounter with a regulated market or with cannabis itself. So having education materials available, making sure that you have all kinds of potencies and products available to people, being ready to explain what these products do and how to use them safely is the right way to go about it. Again, remembering that not everybody is super into cannabis. When we're at HempFest, a lot of people there know cannabis, right? They come to HempFest because they want to consume cannabis, because this is part of their culture. It's part of their identity. But if you open up, like Lotta was saying, you know, a cannabis lounge or a lounge where you can either have a cannabis beverage or an alcohol beverage, in that scenario, you may attract a lot of people that are not familiar with cannabis, that maybe they used alcohol in the past, but they're here, they're going to try cannabis for the first time. And so this is important to remember. And that leads me to my next tip. Train your staff. So anyone selling cannabis or serving cannabis or working in an environment where cannabis is being consumed should be trained not only on how to recommend products and what low dose protocols look like, so minimum effective dose, go low, start slow, all of that, but what to do if someone overconsumes and has a negative experience. So what if somebody starts uses an edible and they feel like they're too high? You know, what if they had a couple glasses of wine before they came in and the alcohol and the cannabis are not mixing well? What do you do in that scenario? So conducting trainings for staff and include role plays. I love my role plays. You know, I think putting people in situations and seeing how they react and getting them to actually act it out is so much more effective than just reading something on a piece of paper. Posting reminders in staff break rooms, including trainings as part of new staff onboarding is all really important. Again, not just so someone understands how long it takes for an edible to kick in and what the difference is between a nano-emulsified and a regular edible and what the difference is between dabbing and smoking and vaporizing. You want them to have that knowledge as well. But you also want them to know what to do if somebody comes up and says, hey, my friend got too high over there and they're starting to have a little bit of a panic attack and I'm not sure what to do. They should know what to do in that scenario as well. All right, next slide. Include other stuff. So you're going to hear a lot about this probably from Brian Applegarth, who talks about effect pairing. And yes, thinking about what activity goes really well with this cannabis is important, especially in Washington, where, goodness, you have pretty much every outdoor activity you could ever possibly want in the world, as well as a whole variety of cultural activities, museums, music. I mean, it really does have something for everyone. So effect pairing is important. But here I'm talking about offering food and board games and other things. And this not only complements cannabis, but it can reduce the chance of overconsumption by diversifying how time is spent. So if you have a cannabis lounge and there's nothing to do except sit and consume cannabis, people are going to consume a lot more cannabis than if they're also playing a board game, or they're also listening to an open mic, or they're also having a food buffet. So I think the idea of it not just being about cannabis, but having cannabis kind of be in the background and part of other social communal experiences that people are having. Again, it not only complements the cannabis, because who doesn't love to get high and play a board game, but it also reduces just sitting there consuming and consuming and consuming, which is going to reduce your chance of overconsumption. So in consumption spaces, we recommend offering board games, arts and crafts. I mean, gosh, put some felt and some glue on a table and people will go nuts. Food and coffee, if that is allowed, and considering hosting open mic nights and other activities. You know, the very early dispensaries, I started studying the dispensaries in the San Francisco Bay Area in the early 2000s, and they were all community centers. I mean, they weren't like Walgreens or CVS. You know, they had arts and crafts, and they had internet access, and they had fresh fruit available. They had open mic nights, and they had storytelling nights. And so it was, yes, cannabis was a part of it, but there was a whole like side of it that was just about play and community and creativity. And I think that balanced it really well. Next slide. So here are my final thoughts before I hand you off to everyone else. Cannabis tourism can bring in revenue. It can bolster state level tourism. It can introduce opportunities for cannabis experiences to those who have not had them. It can provide alternatives to alcohol and allow tourists to see destinations in a whole new way. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there will be many people watching and waiting for a chance to protest its existence altogether. So don't give it to them, right? There are folks right now who are sitting in their houses in Washington that do not want to see this happen. And so if the newspaper or the internet has a headline about people going to a cannabis event and getting too high, or having a car crash, or minors getting in, or, all of the things that news likes to lead with, that's going to give them something to take to a city council meeting, to their legislator, and say, see, this shouldn't happen. If you have people that come to Washington and have a negative experience because they go to a consumption lounge and they're pushing dabs and things that are not appropriate for first-time consumers, they're going to go back to the state that they're from and they're going to say, I don't think legalization is such a good idea. And they're going to vote, and they're going to support people who feel the same way. So this is a huge opportunity. In addition to just being an opportunity for Washington and the people who live here and visit here, it is an opportunity for reform for places like Washington to do this right and to prioritize education and public health, combine them with cannabis and a wide array of activities. And cannabis tourism can absolutely be a success, not just for the state, but for broader cannabis reform. So here's my information. If you want articles on cannabis and public health and moderate consumption, you can go to mypersonalplants.com. Here's my email. Feel free to reach out if you're a cannabis business and you're looking to implement training, or you want to open a consumption lounge and you're looking for safety protocols. Anything I can do to help bring cannabis tourism to Washington in a way that's more formal than it is now, I'm happy to do so. So thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for being here, Dr. Amanda. I think everything you just touched on is what they need to hear from us. We do care enough, right, to create change, and we want it to be so tangible that it shapes our nation's view on this plant. So once again, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Our next guest and our third panelist is Brian Applegarth. He stands at the intersection of cannabis, travel, and tourism. As the founder of the Cannabis Travel Association International, Brian has been instrumental in developing the framework for cannabis tourism across the United States and abroad. He's helped shape how regions integrate cannabis into their hospitality economies, from destination branding to consumer experience. His expertise shows us when it's done right, cannabis hospitality isn't fringe. It's strategic, sustainable. It's a strategic, sustainable sector that drives tourism and uplifts local communities. So please welcome Brian Applegarth to the stream. Here we go. How you doing, Brian?
I'm good, Lotta. How are you?
I'm doing great. Let's get it going.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Brian Applegarth. I've been working in cannabis travel and tourism since about 2013. And my core client profile is working with destinations, typically destination organizations, whether it's marketing organizations or destination stewardship organizations, also economic development departments and chambers of commerce. And my work really circulates around the visitor economy. So this is all about the visitor spend, but most importantly, it's about evolving a destination with community vitality as the North Star. And what does that mean for the cannabis experience economy? And I'd like to touch on that before we dive into this first section on the cannabis travel audience. You can leave the slide up. I just wanted to do a little bit of a runway on what the experience economy means. So the experience economy goes hand in hand with travel and tourism and hospitality. It is not commodities. It's not products. It's not even services, which is time saved. The experience economy is time well spent. So it's spending time in a space in a meaningful way. And in this instance, we're talking about an ancient medicine plant between cannabis and hemp, quite frankly, where the opportunity is to bring a wellness-focused plant with all kinds of therapeutic compounds. How does it express itself in the modern day experience economy for the state of Washington in this instance, which goes hand in hand with travel and tourism? So all of my work tracks back to the cannabis motivated travel audience in the United States. And I've been studying this audience for 5 years with MMGY Travel Intelligence, which is a global leader of studying travel audience profiles. Every year they publish a report called the Portrait of the American Traveler. And they've been doing that for a very long time. And I've been partnered working with them on the cannabis travel audience module and what drives the destination decisions. So this is an audience who chooses where and how to spend their money, and they are interested in traveling to places that have accessible cannabis experiences. And we do also wrap our arms around hemp in spas and places like that because it represents the same plant. So let's look at data from 2025. This was the most recent module study from this summer. And I think one of the most exciting developments is last year, the percentage of cannabis motivated travelers was 34% of the active leisure travel audience in the US. It jumped 5% in 1 year, which is just showing that trend of normalization, legalization. More people are aware and becoming more aware of different experiences that include cannabis and hemp. So that cannabis motivated travel audience continues to grow. They take about 4.1 trips per year, and they spend about $3,500 per year. Now, the top activities of interest are visiting a cannabis shop. Now, the number 2 is a cannabis sampling room. And we use that word sampling in a very specific way because cannabis has tastes. It also has effects. It has aromas. At the end of the day, sampling, we decided, was a nice general term because this plant is so diverse in the way that it shows up. Number 3, visiting a cannabis farm, right? And this is the data where as you develop the cannabis and hemp experience economy, hospitality, tourism, understanding the appetite and what activities of interest are driving the factors behind the economics of a visitor is important to at least be aware of so you can evolve your destination to meet the moment. And of course, number 4 is visit a cannabis lounge. You can see the demographic breakdown off to the left. You know, Gen Zers at 62, millennials at 58, Gen Xers at 30, boomers at 19. We tend to see that the age from like 37 to 43 is kind of really a nice sweet spot of cannabis interested travelers. And again, these are people that are looking at which destination to visit for vacation. Now, we do also look at this audience in 3 segments. We have the canna-curious traveler, the cannabis wellness traveler, and the cannabis connoisseur who might enjoy smoking hash or taking dabs, and it's part of their lifestyle. It's part of their routines is using cannabis. One really interesting part about the cannabis motivated travel audience in the United States is that 24% of the canna-curious audience do not self-identify as cannabis consumers in any way, but they are interested in experiencing, learning, going to an educational workshop, and perhaps they will try a CBD beverage. But this 24%, I think, really differentiates the cannabis motivated travel audience from the cannabis consumer audience that the cannabis industry talks so often about. This travel audience, again, 24% of the canna-curious segment traveler do not self-identify as cannabis consumers, but they will pick which destination to go visit to maybe tour a cannabis farm, just like people tour grape vineyards but may not drink wine, or tour a coffee plantation in Hawaii but may not drink caffeine or coffee. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And again, this travel audience data shapes everything from marketing strategies to destination stewardship strategies. It's also something that cannabis brands and cannabis businesses that are currently open, if you're near a hotel, you are probably in a tourist center. We're having data-driven strategies for the travel economy, for visitor spending is a worthwhile investment. So here's some of the work I've done. I've consulted for about 25 destinations at this point, and I wanted to touch on a few of them. On the upper left corner, you'll see the city of Desert Hot Springs. This was an interesting body of work because it really looked at the development of the experience economy of cannabis from a basically an ecosystem perspective, right? How to enable innovation in a smart, safe way that is on brand for the destination and drives economic vitality in this instance and also something that's sustainable. And how do you go about that from an economic development point of view? Oakland, California has really embraced this. They've done some great work developing the destination, stewarding the destination, as well as marketing the cultural nuance of the destination when it comes to cannabis. There are 3 landmarks that exist in Oakland along the greater Northern California Cannabis Trail that exists. There's about 20 landmarks as of today along that trail from Santa Cruz up to Hayfork in Trinity County in the Emerald Triangle. And an example of this is, Visit Oakland has a few of those landmarks, and they celebrate that cultural storytelling with Oaksterdam. Kind of something I think that mirrors this in Washington is what Vivian built, right? With Seattle Hemp Fest, a great cultural story that really is a signature and a special asset of the state of Washington. And I would really encourage people on this call to really start with the cultural heritage and creating stories and storytelling around that. Culture and cannabis and travel go hand in hand. So it's not just about getting people in the lounge spending money on product. It's about creating amazing experiences. And there are a lot of travelers that really want to understand culture and craft. And that is a great place to start forming strategy from, is to understand how do we bring that forward, and then how do we create these safe consumption spaces to be able to allow for programming, arts, and culture to all come alive. There's been some gamified applications with passports that have happened. In 2024 was the first cooperative marketing program that was put together by Visit Oakland, Visit Mendocino County, and Humboldt County Visitors Bureau. And it was a cooperative effort between 3 destinations in California. Oakland was positioned as the gateway destination. It highlighted, again, the cultural landmarks that existed, and it tied into other landmarks in Mendocino and Humboldt, where we talk about the Back to the Land movement, and we talk about the first hemp store in the United States, which was in southern Humboldt. We talk about the hippie trail and how the seeds came back to the West Coast, specifically the Emerald Triangle. So this is all ideas for you to know about. There are destinations that are actively investing in what is our strategy in relationship to our strategic priorities as well as our brand. So if you're from the travel industry watching this, or if you're some kind of stakeholder from the tourism hospitality industry, I just want to impress that there's a ready, willing, and able audience. Cannabis now exists in your destination, so it is touching the Washington state brand as well as all the other regional and city and county brands within the state. Obviously, you have brand guidelines, brand positioning. You have your core travel audience demographics that you target when you want to invite people to come visit Washington or Seattle or Spokane. And understanding how cannabis integrates into the brand, into the storytelling, into the partnership ecosystem is, again, it's not a matter of if at this point, it's a matter of when and how. And it's an amazing opportunity to grab and create a data baseline and create a cohesive strategy that evolves your destination to truly reflect all the stakeholders that exist and all the experiences that are available. Next slide, please. Okay, so this kind of dovetails off what Dr. Amanda Ryman spoke about, which is, another early step that all destinations need to take is with visitor safety and hospitality frontline staff safety in mind. And that includes tourist information centers, that includes hotel concierge, bellhops, all frontline staff at hotels and resorts. That also includes cannabis shops and perhaps lounges one day, where they exist in a tourist center, right? So if you're in a place where there's hotels, there's a high activity of visitor foot traffic, then you want to have your staff trained. I spent the last year creating the Cannabis and Hemp Hospitality Training course. I specifically created this, basically taking all the learnings over the past 10 years and weaving together what I feel is a great baseline knowledge set for the hospitality frontline staff of a destination. And it gets them comfortable understanding what cannabis and hemp mean today. And it provides a bit of history, as well as talking points, as well as tips and tricks and ways to provide a great guest interaction that is meaningful and that is integrated into the destination. If anyone has questions about this, I'll drop my email in the chat after I'm done here speaking. But please reach out. I'm looking to really circulate this starting in 2026 in a meaningful way. And again, it was created for, tourist information centers, hotels, but also lounges and shops to have a hospitality kind of polish for your staff. Next slide, please. And that kind of goes into this effect pairing that, again, Amanda mentioned when she was speaking. And this is an important part of cannabis because it really, when you're talking about that THC component, and before I dive into this, I want to be clear too that there's hundreds of other therapeutic compounds in this plant. And that's why we have to include the hemp and spa conversation and the topical applications, what a full spectrum massage versus, a broad spectrum massage minus the THC. So depending on where you're at and what the laws are today and policies are ever evolving, there is this THC component, which takes up a lot of the air in the room. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the effects that cannabis offers as what we call an entheogen. And if you're from the travel and tourism industry trying to understand what words like entheogen mean, it's getting high, but it's so different today because it's that full spectrum of all these different types of cannabis plants and flowers offer different types of effects. Some are very mild, some are stronger. It depends on your experience. And it's very different than being inebriated from alcohol. So understanding how entheogenic products are showing up in tourism is a really important conversation to meet head on for public safety initially, absolutely all day, as well as that next step of integration. So the effect pairing cannabis method is intended to position cannabis as an interactive tool for enhancing an activity or experience that's on your itinerary while you're in town. Let's go to the next slide and dive into what this looks like. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's stay on this. So the effect pairing cannabis is essentially as food pairs with wine, cannabis pairs with activities and experiences. And it's all about creating a step-by-step process and understanding what kind of cannabis product you might consume prior to going on a nature activity, or prior to going into a Michelin star meal, or prior to going to an art exhibit featuring local artists from the greater Seattle area. Cannabis can be an excellent precursor to a setting. It's mindset and setting reimagined with microdose and intention. And it allows space for people that are operating shops and lounges and able to speak intelligently to this. It allows for a conversation which really teaches people to consume with intention of what is the environment or the activity or the itinerary experience that you are going to do. What is your experience with cannabis and or hemp? And how do you mindfully consume to enhance that nature hike in the woods or on the coast? So anyways, I feel like this is the future of integration because the data, if the 5 years of data we've done with the cannabis motivated travel audience, the data shows that this audience, which is about 75 million Americans, are motivated by destinations that offer cannabis experiences. This audience is already connecting the dot that cannabis and what you consume matters when you go to an art exhibit, a nature walk, and or a Michelin star meal. So anyways, thank you all for listening. I'll drop my email in the chat. Great opportunity. And thanks so much to the Cannabis Alliance for setting this up. Appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Thank you once again, Brian, for being here and sharing your wisdom. Our next guest, Adelia Fakiri, co-founded Event High, a leading ticketing and event hosting platform built specifically for cannabis culture, and serves as its chief marketing officer. Drawing on her experience in event planning, marketing, and entrepreneurship, Adelia has helped crafted inclusive and dynamic spaces where cannabis community and commerce intersect. Her work challenges the norms and elevates how the plant is showcased in hospitality and culture. Please welcome Adelia Fakiri. Oh, and There we go.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lotta, for the introduction. I'm so grateful to be here for this important conversation. You know, the whole time I'm just shaking my head listening to everybody speak, and there's just so much valuable advice that was coming in today. And so, yeah, for those that don't know me, my name is Adelia Fakri. I am the CMO at Event High. Event High is an online ticketing and event platform built specifically for the cannabis industry. So at its core, Event High has created a platform to give event creators, brands, and consumers a safe and compliant digital space to basically build and attend cannabis-related experiences. Why this is important is, you know, unlike mainstream ticketing platforms, we've actually tailored a ticketing platform catering to this industry. There's a lot of restrictions when it comes to banking, payments, all these things. And so that's really what the solution was for why Event High came into fruition. So again, we help event organizers sell tickets and sponsorships. We promote events, and we help them stay compliant in a space where mainstream platforms are still to this day shutting cannabis events down on their platforms. So with that, why I am here is I'm going to give an overview of what we are seeing here at Event High, into the experiences, talking a little bit about the licenses, and just some things that we can all, you know, take into consideration as states continue to add on and hopefully become more accepting to cannabis events and lounges and experiences as a whole. So at Event High, you know, we've got a front row seat to how cannabis hospitality is evolving in real time. Every week, we are getting to see what's being built by passionate event creators, brands, and communities all over the country. We actually work with event creators in over 47 states. These can be micro events to large scale festivals on a national level. And we are honestly seeing a major shift. You know, people aren't just hosting cannabis events anymore. They're actually designing experiences rooted in hospitality. We're seeing consumption lounges come to life, infused dinners that incorporate fine dining, wellness retreats, brand pop-ups that, again, feel like curated art experiences. What's even more exciting is that it's not just traditional venues that are stepping up these days. We're seeing hotels, art galleries, wineries, spaces that once were hesitant to open the doors to cannabis events are now exploring how to safely and thoughtfully welcome cannabis into their environments. And so because of this, event categories are expanding beyond industry, networking events, and B2B. We're seeing more lifestyle, wellness, and cultural gatherings, where again, cannabis was once a broader experience. And so with that, I'm going to be mindful of our time. So I'm going to focus a little bit more now on, you know, the experiences that are emerging. We're going to start with consumption lounges and social spaces. We've heard a little bit about that today. So for those that are not familiar, these are licensed venues for adult use, similar to a cigar lounge or a wine bar, where guests can enjoy cannabis in a safe and controlled environment. Now you also have cannabis-friendly hospitality, which we heard from Brian earlier mention that. You know, hotels and resorts are beginning to integrate cannabis into their offering, whether it's a cannabis-friendly lodging experience, a partnership with a nearby lounge, or private event tie-ins. We're also seeing a wave of culinary and beverage events. As I mentioned earlier, infused dinners. We're also seeing elevated mocktail bars, high teas, and chef-led tasting experiences. So these gatherings can bring cannabis into the world of fine dining and mixology. And we're also going to be looking at, you know, one of my favorite categories, which is wellness and self-care events. So these are yoga sessions, meditation circles, holistic retreats where cannabis becomes part of the wellness ritual. We also are seeing on a larger scale festival and cultural gatherings. We've seen these over the years with Vivian, as he mentioned, with the Seattle Hemp Fest. There was also the Emerald Cup, and they are dedicating consumption zones, as you heard earlier. These events celebrate music, art, community on a larger scale. And finally, at Event High, we're seeing more professional and educational mixers, especially in states that have not necessarily had any medical or adult use in their states yet. They are already leading the charge on educational events. So those are networking events, women in business conferences and events, industry socials where consumption is normalized in a respectful adult setting. All of these examples have one thing in common. They're showing that cannabis hospitality is more than just a plant. It's about the people. It's about creating meaningful, inclusive experiences that, again, celebrate community, connection, and culture. So looking at all this, why does this matter? Why do these hospitality-focused cannabis spaces matter to any of us? And it's because they touch the heart of legalization, of culture, community, tourism, and commerce. They represent the next step in normalizing the industry. We're taking cannabis out of the shadows and bringing it into the light of responsible shared experiences. Now, those that are familiar with the industry, we are all used to being put in the back corner, outside in an alley to go and consume. This is changing. We're seeing it change dramatically over the years. And again, why it matters is we're normalizing legal use. When people can consume in a safe, regulated area, it shifts cannabis out of an informal or underground setting. Second, these spaces address what I like to call the consumption gap. So we've legalized the purchase of cannabis in many states, but for so many consumers, as we also heard earlier, especially renters, tourists, and hotel guests, there's still nowhere to legally consume. So hospitality venues and events and lounges fill that gap. They're providing a designated, compliant, and welcome space. Third, there's the economic and tourism impact, as you heard from Brian Applegarth earlier. When hospitality and events and cannabis come together, it creates an entirely new stream of revenue for local economies, small businesses, and of course, venues. We're talking about ticket sales, lodging, dining, transportation, local partnerships that again drive tourism, as Brian was sharing. And then there's a policy standpoint. I know Amanda touched on some of these important factors, and there's a real compliance benefit about bringing these legal spaces in. It allows for proper age verification, ventilation systems, and responsible use oversight. It gives regulators and the public confidence that social consumption can be managed safely and professionally. Now, I'm going to be sharing quickly over what we are seeing in some of the states that we've worked with. We're going to start with California because it's one of the few states that has built a formal framework for cannabis events. Now, we do need policy, again, when it comes to cannabis events and hospitality. In California, they have a two-stage licensing model. First, event organizers must hold a cannabis event organizer license. Then, for each specific event, they apply for a temporary cannabis event license. These temporary event licenses has to be submitted at least 60 days in advance. These state fees structure are set at $1,000 for application fee. And then, of course, there's additional licensing fees. This is based on, how many events you're hosting per year. For example, 5 or fewer events fall into one tier, 6 to 10 in another, and so forth. But there's something to keep in mind with this model. It's based on frequency, not size or scale. So again, we have different types of events. We have very small micro events to large scale events. And these micro events may not be able to feasibly cover these certain costs. So although we have a great model in California, there are still some things that I think need to be tweaked to better fit it for it to be accessible to all event organizers. And so just a couple things that people do have to follow when it comes to this cannabis event organizer license is local municipality approval is mandatory. You can't move forward without it. Only licensed distributors can transport cannabis products to and from the event. Sales can only be conducted by licensed retailers. And again, consumption areas must be 21 and over, enclosed and not visible to the public. So while California has taken an important step into legalizing on-site consumption events, it's not without its challenges, as I mentioned. There are some other states as well, which I will quickly touch over, that have already started incorporating regulated hospitality and social consumption spaces. So across the country, we're looking at states like Alaska, Colorado, Illinois, Nevada, New Jersey, and New Mexico. They are introducing models for on-site consumption and lounges, each with its own approach, of course. Some have pilot programs, others integrate lounges directly into retail licenses. Nevada stands out as a strong example because it now issues licensed consumption lounge permits, giving both tourists and locals a safe, legal place to consume. Colorado and Alaska have taken smaller incremental steps, allowing existing dispensaries to add consumption areas under strict safety and ventilation rules. There's also states like New Jersey, Illinois, and New Mexico that allow social consumption, but it's still up to local jurisdictions to opt in. So again, we're starting to see a change within each state, and they're beginning to, perfect it and make sure they're providing things that are accessible. But a couple things to keep in mind with this, again, is, fees need to be reflected on the site and scale, the size and scale of an event. We need small event organizers to be able to they want to be compliant, but they might not be able to afford $1,000 CEO temporary license because they're barely making a few hundred. So again, we're going to need to, as these conversations go on with event licensing, we need to start keeping those things into consideration. Second, local versus state control must be clear. We have a client that we've worked with at Event High called the Farmers Cup. They have been pushing to host a cannabis license event in San Diego for years, and they finally were able to. But it took forever because local jurisdiction wouldn't jump on board. None of the local cities wanted to be the first to say yes. That has changed now, and the Cannabis Farmers Market is now on to their, I believe, third in-person license event. We also need to, again, make sure which is the biggest and most important thing, I think, is age and access rules. Again, these spaces must be 21 and over, secure, and out of public view. And from an operational standpoint, infrastructure matters. So again, ventilation, security, signage, liability protocols aren't just compliance requirements, they're hospitality standards. And finally, equity and innovation. We must stay at the center. Policies should support small operators, not just large festivals, so that we can all create these unique experiences. Now, I will end with this. I know I jumped a little bit, but again, I want to be mindful of the time and what we are covering today. So in closing, these are the lines I want to leave you all with, of what we're seeing here and why we're advocating for this as an industry. And that's really where it all begins, because it's what we've done. We've done the work to legalize the plant, that we actually now owe it to the people to create safe and regulated and welcoming environments where it can be experienced responsibly. We're not just building events over here, we're building experiences, culture, and community. Every gathering, every lounge, every shared moment helps redefine what cannabis looks like in a modern society. It's not just a product, it's a lifestyle, a connection point, a culture that's in motion. So again, hospitality gives cannabis a seat at the table, literally and figuratively. By integrating cannabis into hospitality, into food, wellness, travel, and social life, we're inviting it into the mainstream conversation. We're showing what inclusion really looks like. So again, normalizing doesn't stop at legalization. It continues in how we gather, in how we consume, in how we connect. And that's where the real shift matters. In the way we show up together and create shared experiences that break down stigma through openness and authenticity. And finally, the true shift happens not just in the dispensary, but again, going back to the shared experience. Because the moment people come together around a table, at a lounge, at a garden, at an event, we're going to continue to change the perception. So as we move forward, the goal is to continue building not just an industry, but a movement rooted in responsibility, inclusion, and connection. Because legal cannabis truly deserves legal spaces. Again, my name is Adelia Fakhri, CMO of Event High, and always happy to answer any questions when it comes to the event landscape as a whole.
Thank you so much for joining us here today and sharing your wisdom from the national perspective. And stick around. We are going to have an opportunity for those in the audience to ask questions. So thank you. We're a little bit behind time, but I know you want to hear from this individual. So last but not least, Russ Hudson joins us as one of the most respected global voices in cannabis policy and business strategy, a seasoned consultant, researcher, and author. Russ has advised governments, investors, and operators across multiple countries on cannabis regulation and market design. His global perspective brings Washington's opportunity into focus, showing how international models of cannabis hospitality are already proving viable, safe, and economically powerful. He reminds us that the question isn't whether cannabis hospitality can work, it's how Washington can lead in doing it best. Please welcome Russ Hudson to the stream.
Thanks, Charlotte. Appreciate that intro, and thanks for having me here, folks. I will try to be quick here, and that should be easy for me to do because some of the other panelists covered things that I'm covering as well. I'll go into a little bit more detail. First of all, I'm actually new to Washington. I just moved here about a month ago, but I have spent over 30 years in cannabis in most places where cannabis has been legal or tolerated, including living in Uruguay and Germany and many years in the Netherlands and Spain. And so I do have a unique perspective to bring here to this state. I do intend to be here to be very active in Washington's cannabis community. So this is an important issue to me. First, what I want to talk about, which has been touched on a little bit, is what kind of message are we sending by not having safe legal spaces for people to consume in? This has been a passion of mine for going on 10 years now. I actually wrote a children's book about cannabis to address this exact issue, because here's the situation. And I know this still goes on. If you're a parent and you consume cannabis, but you don't do it in front of your kids, or you hide your cannabis use from your children, you're actually sending a really bad message. And that message is that cannabis equals bad. It must be hidden. And so I've long thought that this message needs to start with parents and children. And why is it okay that, mommy can have a glass of wine in front of her kids, but not, to smoke a joint or to have a puff of a vape? And so this is continuing here in Washington State, where we have no mechanisms for safe social consumption. What kind of message are we sending? We're sending the message that cannabis is seedy. It needs to be relegated to the back alleys. Which is where we've been all along these 60, 70 years of this prohibition. That's exactly what we've been doing. So even for us as cannabis consumers, what has really changed? We're still lurking in the shadows, and this is what really needs to happen. So by way of a very short introduction, I have been in cannabis for 30 years. I have worked in every aspect of the industry. I've been to jail multiple times for cannabis in my work with cannabis, and also spent a good portion of my career keeping people out of jail. This included working for years with the cannabis lounges, or they're not really lounges, they're coffee shops, in the Netherlands, and 7 years working with the private cannabis social clubs, mostly in Barcelona, Spain, where I lived. And so I have seen firsthand hundreds and hundreds of these social models and how they work and what it does for the local community. So what I will say first of all is, we've talked in this panel a lot about different types of hospitality related events where cannabis would be featured or would be a central part of it. And what really happens is the social club becomes this base for hospitality, becomes the base for the cannabis culture. And it often leads to all these other events. Social clubs are where these events are planned and where the idea for them are conceptualized. Many cases, that happens to just be the origin, that happens to be the route. So I have helped open hundreds of these cannabis social clubs, and I've helped quite literally tens of thousands of people, tourists from all over the world, travelers, business folks. When they come to Spain, I help them access these clubs and make sure that it happens in a safe way for them. And so I have seen this a lot. And to me, what I know of as the social club model and why we need this here in Washington so much is because it offers legitimacy. How does a non-cannabis person or a regulator or a lawmaker really understand what it is that we're doing when we get together as consumers, when they have no bar to establish to kind of look at that? Again, we've always been relegated to the shadows. We're still being asked to be relegated to the shadows now. So what's happening in these clubs, right? In Barcelona alone, there are about 300 these private cannabis social clubs. And we're talking about doctors, dentists, lawyers, teachers, students, janitors, the unemployed, people looking for work. All of these people come to these social places because it is a safe space for shared consumption. In Spain, kind of the rules that go along with it is that the clubs are also auto consumo, auto cultivo. What that means is they are self-supplying. So when you talk about what's really happening at these social clubs, you're just talking about regular people going and having quiet conversations, playing chess, working on art projects. These social clubs will have movie nights and dinner nights, and we're not talking about raging parties with alcohol and very loud music. These are very quiet, respectful places. In most cases, you can walk the streets anywhere in Barcelona and you can walk by these social clubs all day and literally not know that they're there. Part of that is because they're private, so they're not allowed to like make a public presence or publicly advertise. So this is really what we need for legitimacy is we need people to understand that what's really going on at these clubs is not a bunch of debauchery and seediness. It's mostly blue and white collar folks going to have a safe space because they don't want to be smoking out on the street. And because they also want to meet other people who share these kind of same values. So the whole model of social access, of the social club model, is really what we need to legitimize this legal cannabis that we already have here in Washington state and stop pushing it into the shadows. When we bring it out into the open, people will relax. When we bring it out into the open, people will see there's nothing to fear here. And so we can stop creating these regulations and ordinances and statutes that are really fear-based knee-jerk reactions to the lies that we've all been sold about cannabis for many decades now. So that normalization is really important for Washington state. With this, these clubs could use the same model. They could self-supply. So you could have a situation where the members of these clubs are able to have a role or a part or at least a voice in the types of cannabis products that are produced for them. And they may not even need to go to the dispensary. It could also be a hub for learning about how to grow. And how to make your own cannabis products safely. So there is something to be said also about the self-supply, if that could be legislated, if we can, gain this type of social club status here in the state. Again, I mentioned that these clubs are private. Obviously, we don't have to use the same model that's been used in Europe and particularly in Spain, but it makes sense. Why? Because as a private club, you can't just walk in off the street. You actually have to know somebody who already is a member of the club, and they recommend you, they refer you, and then you go through an inscription process, very short and simple, and become a member. So what this means is that these social environments actually have control over their members. They can gear their club to be focused in some way. Like some clubs are focused on playing chess and playing games, and some clubs are really focused on watching football or soccer games, and some clubs are very art focused. So you can have these sort of specialties where the members are a group of like-minded people, and they're able to control that. They're able to control the idea that drunken revelers can't come in off the street and kind of create chaos in the club. So you have control over the membership in these clubs, and they can be everywhere. Again, Barcelona is a fairly small city. To have 300 clubs there is indicative of how needed these establishments are. It's also indicative of the behavior, that control of members and the safety. So if you experience any bar in Barcelona, as a major city, for instance, you're going to see that typical alcohol related liveliness, to put it nicely, but often, the problems that go along with that are there. And we don't see that in the cannabis social clubs. We don't have noise complaints. We don't have neighbors that are getting furious. We don't have, people pissing in the street. We don't have people throwing bottles. It's a very quiet place. And in fact, most of the people who visit these establishments are exactly and precisely looking to avoid the alcohol crowd and the bars and everything that goes along with that. So it is a lot safer to have control over the members. Of course, again, that's not the only way that it could be done, but that safety extends to many other things. As has been mentioned, ventilation is a huge issue. Pushing cannabis smokers into underground layers, so to speak, where there aren't considerations for ventilation is bad for those folks. It's bad for neighbors. It's just not a good policy. The Barcelona Cannabis Club model, even though it doesn't have legislation to particularly protect it or to rule it, it does have local control, and the main focus of that control is ventilation. In fact, the easiest way to get a cannabis social club in Spain shut down is by complaints about the ventilation or making it impossible for the club to have the right type of ventilation. So we know from long experience this ventilation is a serious safety issue. And this is something that we can mitigate by having these social clubs, by having rules about ventilation and making sure that these folks are doing things in the right way. We also have, as was previously mentioned, age verification. We can make sure that only legal adults are taking part in the legal Washington cannabis industry. And also we have the observation power to then bar other substances, right? Like in the cannabis social clubs of Spain, you're really not seeing people going in there and using other substances. In fact, in most cases, they're not even using alcohol, and most clubs don't serve alcohol. Some do, but most don't. So you're talking about a space that is just for cannabis. There's no cocaine, there's no crack, there's none of that nonsense. And if any of that is observed, you're kicked out and barred from the club. So having this type of control, not only over the members and who you are communicating with and being in community with, it also helps to have these safety protocols that we do all care about. And these are things that you see in the membership. The people inside these clubs, they actually care about these things. And if the public and lawmakers knew that we are a group of people who care about our health and about our effects on others in our environment, if they knew that, it would be much easier to sort of make this social and hospitality environment a real possibility that could benefit in many ways, which brings me to my next point, which is employment. These social clubs employ many hundreds of people, particularly in Barcelona. And these are not even cannabis people all the time. It's often happens that the employees inside these cannabis clubs are just regular people who needed a regular job. And that speaks volumes. If you work at a cannabis club, that does not mean that you're a stoner. It just means you're a regular person who needed a job. And this job is a serious job, just like any other job. This is an important distinction to make, and we don't really have that here. And so finally, in fairness, and this has been touched on a little bit as well, but if you can go to any restaurant and drink yourself silly, and the chances that you may do something stupid afterward, like kill somebody in a drunk driving accident, are relatively high. If this happens all over Washington state and you can buy and consume alcohol as, an above the age consumer, doesn't it make sense that in all fairness, if we have a legal industry for cannabis as well, that we should have spaces that we can go instead of being told to hide in the shadows? And so you can really see from top to bottom how the hospitality industry in cannabis almost always fundamentally starts with the cannabis social club and branches out from there. And what these cannabis social clubs bring and what this model brings in these members and their appearances and perspectives and actions in their community is legitimacy to an already legal market.
Wow. Thank you so much, Russ, because I think you said what needed to be said here today. Again, we really appreciate your strong voice and the bodies of works that you have published thus far to continue educating those about this plant. Stick around. They might have some questions. Thank you so much. Well, everyone, I don't know what else we could tell you about cannabis hospitality and its need in the state of Washington. In fact, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Machardo, founder of Canaluz, board president of the Cannabis Alliance, to give, excuse me, our closing remarks in regarding of what is our path forward currently. Jessica?
Thank you, Lotta. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today, for being a part of this conversation on cannabis hospitality. As president of the Cannabis Alliance, I want to extend my deepest gratitude for our incredible panelists and all of our guests for bringing your expertise, passion, and truly your lived experience to today's conversation. You know, we really grounded ourselves in data, in that said lived experience across Washington and the nation, even internationally today. So thank you. And you know, it really grounds also the work ahead, work that continues to be ushered and stewarded by a collaboration, accountability, and the communities that we serve here at the Cannabis Alliance. That's our membership. And so cannabis hospitality, it represents an opportunity to align culture, tourism, and public safety while expanding equitable access to cannabis spaces. I want to note that we invited the Liquor and Cannabis Board to participate in today's discussion. While they chose not to join us, we remain committed to building transparent and accountable dialogue with our regulatory partners. We believe in honest engagement that centers problem solving over polarization, and will keep showing up for that conversation respectfully and persistently. Our work doesn't stop here. Alongside our Cannabis Hospitality Committee, we're actively advancing HB 1932, which would create cannabis event licenses in Washington state. The legislation that we're working on represents a major step towards equitable access, tourism growth, and safe legal spaces for consumption, which is a key piece of normalizing and celebrating cannabis culture responsibly. You can read more about this and all of our other work at our and all our other advocacy work on our website at thecannabisalliance.us. I also want to highlight the incredible work of our data committee that is led by D. Marlon Sisney. You will be able to explore our data dashboard, which was introduced earlier today in this conversation on our website. This is an evolving resource built to inform advocacy with transparency and evidence. It's one more way that we're grounding policy conversations in truth and measurable impact. A special thank you to Lotta Brathwaite, board member and chair of our Cannabis Hospitality Committee, for leading this work and bringing today's program forward. The Bakersman Collective, led by Lotta, produced storytelling, production, and design that really helped bring this conversation to life in a way that really resembles the spirit of this movement. And so a big thank you to her. The progress that we're seeing is the result of members like her, like Dee, stepping up through committees, through testimony, and through collaboration. So if you believe in this work, I ask that you join us as a member here at the Cannabis Alliance. You can find that information on our website by clicking on Get Involved and becoming a member. We are stronger with you in it, and we are excited to continue ushering this work with your help and with your voice at the table. I want to thank you again for your time, your curiosity, and your commitment to progress through cannabis hospitality. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you once again, Jessica, for that kind conversation and flowers and pointing y'all to the right direction. It has been a blast talking to you about our needs here in the state. Have a good afternoon, y'all.